After Superman and the Mole Men premiered in 1951, we had to wait over 25 years to get another Superman movie on the big screen. While he had some great forays in television, in the cartoon world, and was even on Broadway, it wasn't until 1978 that we got another Superman movie on the big screen. And not only was it another Superman movie, but it was probably the first superhero blockbuster. Welcome to the Summer of Superman, and hopefully you can join me on this journey through Superman's theatrical roller coaster ride. So I've already previously discussed the two serials as well as the Mole Men, but now it's time to move into the major players. That is the new blockbuster era of Superman and superhero films. Now, since the release of Superman and the Mole Men, DC did release Batman in 1966. However, that was still sort of a TV movie that was released theatrically almost. And so you still did not have a blockbuster. And even the blockbusters as we know them today didn't really birth until the 1970s with Jaws and Star Wars and this film. And so today we will be discussing the original superhero blockbuster, 1978's Superman. Earlier in the decade of the 1970s, the Salkinds and Spengler were able to gain the live-action movie rights to Superman. And not only were they going to make a Superman movie, they were going to film Superman and Superman 2 back-to-back as almost one giant epic movie that would just get split in half. Now that they have the rights, they need a story. And not only do they need a story, they need an epic story that lasts over 2 films and 2 parts. So who better to hire than the man who wrote the epic Godfather? The Salkinds went and hired Mario Puzo, the author of The Godfather. Now that they have the amazing Mario Puzo writing a story, they need a director to bring that vision to life. They had a lot of people in mind to direct this movie, ranging from Francis Ford Coppola, who directed Mario Puzo's The Godfather, to The Exorcist William Friedkin, and even Richard Lester, who the Salkinds had worked with previously during The Three Musketeers. Ultimately, they decided on Guy Hamilton, the man who directed Goldfinger as well as 3 other James Bond movies. However, Guy Hamilton, he kind of fell ill. He had some production issues because production had to move from Italy to England because of some legal troubles that Marlon Brando had revolving obscenity charges in Italy due to The Last Tango in Paris. So Guy Hamilton was unable to stay with the project after it moved from Italy to England. And luckily the producers had just watched The Omen. And from right then and there, they wanted to hire Richard Donner. And Donner then brought in Tom Mankiewicz to rewrite Mario Puzo's original story because, first, they thought it was a little too campy, but they also added that Puzo's script was very, very well written and very good. However, it was 550 pages long and would take a ridiculous amount of time to film, even for 2 movies. So they had to reduce the script. It became less heavy and less dense, but also still retained the epic feeling. So we have a script and we have a director. Now we need a Superman. Prior to Richard Donner getting involved, the producers wanted an A-list actor for Superman, someone that you can easily just put on the marquee, and not only will Superman sell tickets, but the A-list star will as well. And particularly, they wanted Robert Redford. However, Donner wanted an unknown actor. Because in his movie, when Superman shows up, they don't want the audience in the theater to go, hey, look, it's Robert Redford. They want the audience in the theater to go, hey, look, it's Superman. During the casting process, they went through practically everybody on Earth, from Bruce Jenner to Arnold Schwarzenegger to John Wayne's son to James Caan and Sylvester Stallone, to even auditioning the producer's wife's dentist. However, they kept running into the same problems. They either had the perfect physique and look, but were terrible actors, or they had played the part amazingly, but looked nothing like the part. And after previously turning down Christopher Reeve for being too skinny, they decided to give him another look, and they brought him back, and they did a screen test, and they loved it. And Christopher Reeve then went on a strict diet so he could kind of build up his physique and get more of a Superman look. Superman ended up being the most expensive movie ever made at this point in time, and a lot of that spending caused issues between Richard Donner and the Salkins and Spengler, the producers, which did not have too large of an effect on this movie in particular, but it did have a major effect on Superman 2, which we'll discuss in a later video. But essentially, from the Salkins' point of view, Donner was making his movie without regarding any budget. He was spending the money when he needed to spend the money to get the outcome that he wanted, and he was disregarding schedules, and so he was constantly going over schedule. Eventually, Richard Lester would kind of come in as a co-producer, but also somewhat uncredited as a co-producer, just as sort of a middleman between and mediator between the Salkins and Richard Donner. Essentially, they decided to stop filming Superman and Superman 2 back-to-back so they could just focus on filming and finishing the first movie, which meant they stopped production on Superman 2 after 75% of the movie had already been filmed. As for the rest of the cast outside of Superman, you have Marlon Brando, Vito Corleone himself portraying Jor-El, and I thought his portrayal and his depiction and the way he's written really gives this film, at least the beginning of this movie, a lot of gravitas and gives it a real epic feeling. And then you have Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, and it's very much an old school kind of mad genius real estate agent version of Lex Luthor rather than kind of a public figure that's evil behind the scenes that you get in the modern day Luthor. And personally, I know this is kind of a popular opinion for modern viewers like me, but it's somewhat of a hot take for your older viewers. I don't like Gene Hackman's Luthor. However, my reasons for not necessarily liking his Luthor has more to do with the writing rather than the actual performance. I think Gene Hackman does give this Luthor a lot of villainous, really good villainous moments when he's allowed to be a supervillain. But there's a lot of campiness and jokiness and winking at the eyes that doesn't always sit well. You have Ned Beatty as Otis. All I'm going to say about Otis is he is the second worst thing in this movie. There's two things in this movie that really bug me. I think it's a great movie, I do. But Otis is one of those things that I can't stand in this movie. And I don't think he adds anything to this movie. He doesn't add any story elements. He doesn't add any extra threatening elements to it. He's just there. You have Valerie Pyrene as Eve Tessmacher, Jack O'Halloran, Sarah Douglas, and the great Terrence Stamp as Non-Ursa and General Zod, respectively. And their roles are more important for Superman 2, but they are in the first act of this movie. You have Jackie Cooper as Perry White, you have Mark McClure as Jimmy Olsen, and last but certainly not least, you have Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. Lois Lane had her own casting saga as well, just like Superman did. And I just want to mention this as a fun trivia fact that Stockard Channing, aka Rizzo from Grease, had a screen test to play Lois Lane. And weirdly, I kind of like to try and sit back and imagine a world where Rizzo is Lois Lane. However, Margot Robbie was the perfect pick. She has an amazing chemistry with Christopher Reeve. She perfectly balances being a domineering co-worker towards Clark Kent, as well as being an awestruck damsel in distress towards Superman. Now, the plot is actually pretty simple, but it spans an epic amount of time. You start in Krypton with General Zod and associates getting banished to the Phantom Zone, and then Jor-El trying to convince the Council later on about Krypton's doom and to try and save the planet. Obviously, they don't listen, and Jor-El puts his son Kal-El in the ship and flies off to Earth. And this is actually all done really well. I thought for 1970s sci-fi, not planet Earth setting, I thought it was all really well and done in a way that makes it feel epic. It's the most epic feeling part of the movie is the opening and in Krypton. And you eventually get Clark in Smallville racing trains, and then his father gets a heart attack, and then all of a sudden a crystal calls to him. He goes to the North Pole, creates the Fortress of Solitude, and apparently, after what was apparently a 12-year-long speech from Jor-El, or the AI version of Jor-El, Superman is finally born. You then go to Metropolis, you get introduced to all of the side characters like Perry White, Jimmy Olsen, and Lois Lane, as well as the villain in Lex Luthor and his crew with Ned Beatty and Eve Tessmacher. Superman flies around, he saves a helicopter, saves Lois Lane, saves a bunch of people, he even saves a cat. But then you have Lex Luthor's plan of creating an earthquake on the San Andreas Fault in California to drive every piece of California west of the San Andreas into the Pacific. Because Lex Luthor conveniently was able to buy up all of the land that would then make up the new West Coast. And so he'd become this real estate giant billionaire. Now, a lot of elements in this story on paper you can kind of pick fun at, especially like the earthquake stuff and buying the entire West Coast. But I think it kind of fits really well within the hopeful tone that this movie is going for. And just briefly, I have to mention the music here is one of the greatest musical scores in film history. We all know it, we all love it, the John Williams Superman score that we've heard 1,000 times. Now getting into a very personal opinion here. This film is 90 to 95% amazing. This is so extremely close to being potentially not just one of my favorite comic book movies of all time, but even potentially being one of my favorite movies of all time. However, due to one gigantic problem that I have with this movie, it stops it from even being my favorite Superman film. Now, this problem takes up a very, very, very small amount of runtime. However, it is the climactic beat and the climactic moment in the movie. And so while the runtime that it has on the movie is very, very minimal, but the impact it has on affecting the entire story is huge. And if you can't figure out what part of the movie I'm talking about, it's the time travel sequence. Story-wise, I have no problem with having Superman time travel to kind of help save the world. However, the mechanism they choose to use to execute the time travel is where I have such a huge problem with this movie. It's one of my pet peeves in time travel movies is when they use this type of time travel. So the type of time travel they use in this movie is to have Superman reverse the Earth's rotation on its axis. This is a concept of time travel that feels like it belongs in the 1800s. The 1970s, after we've had scientific achievements like the atomic bomb 3 decades prior, they know this is not how physics work. Going to high school, you should know this is not how physics work. And I'm not saying time travel is supposed to be super realistic, no. But this is just, it's not. This is stupid. This type of time travel is so mind-bogglingly outdated. So even for its time, it feels like an extremely outdated and ill-conceived, stupid conceptualization of how time travel works. Time travel rants aside, and the fact that I hate Otis in this movie, 90% of this movie is absolutely phenomenal. And it more than deserves a thumbs up from your comic book movie historian. It is an epic movie that just kind of fails the landing with its time travel conceptualization. It is still by far the best movie we have covered thus far in the summer of Superman. However, spoiler alert, it probably won't be the best one by the time this series ends. So thanks for watching this video on Superman the movie from 1978. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you can join the summer of Superman and hear me talk about Superman 2 in the next video. Also, don't forget to smash that thumbs up icon and leave your comments on Superman 1978 in the comments section down below. And hopefully you enjoyed this video, and always stay super.